Well, Vanity Fair, remember that magazine? The employees there are having a meltdown, a hissy fit over the possibility that First Lady Melania Trump could be featured on its cover. Joining me now is Brianna Lyman, the Federalist correspondent, and an editor-in-chief that we brought in just with his expert advice, Rich Lowry, National Review editor-in-chief. Good to see you both here.
Good to be here.
Brianna, I'll start with you. This is the first time we have had a first lady who is actually a cover model. Yeah. She's been on the cover of magazines before, like Vanity Fair, et cetera. And the staff is really preparing to walk out because she would be on the cover? I mean, what's up with this?
Yeah, I think the best way to understand this outrage is you have to look at magazines as part of the arts institutions. And unfortunately, institutions have become ideological battlegrounds. Now, Melania Trump may have been a career model, but right now she represents something else. She represents a shift in America to the right. And for a long time, the left has had the opportunity to set the narrative through these institutions about what is cool, what's not cool, what can be admired, what can't be, and what's acceptable and what's not. And we know where conservatives have fallen on that spectrum. So to put Melania Trump on the cover would be that final nail in the coffin to the left to say, hey, you guys actually don't get to set the narrative anymore because being conservative is cool. It is in trend.
Well, you're giving a very good intellectual reason for why this is happening. I want a managerial response, though. What would you do? And I'm going to quote, people will know what I'm talking about, but one of the editors apparently told the Daily Mail, if she's on a cover, I will walk out the mother effing door. What would you tell an editor like that?
Well, I don't think that editor is going to walk out the door. It's not breaking news, David, that it's not a great time to be a print editor. You know, this is not a growth business. If you have a job at an institution like Vanity Fair, you're very lucky. And it's easy to say you're going to walk out the door. It's another thing to walk out the door. And it's just an outrage, this boycott on her whole first term, a fashion model, not on the cover of any glossy magazine in the United States. Joe Biden was on the cover of Vogue when Joe had the horrible debate, and you're not putting Melania on a cover? Come on.
Unbelievable. All right, another social issue that we're going to talk about, Cracker Barrel. Of course, it really appears to be a Bud Light moment where they go so woke. What is wrong with them? I mean, haven't they learned their lesson by now? If I was a stockholder, I'd be furious. I'm not, but if I was, I'd be furious.
Smart call.
Yeah.
Smart call. You know, to bring up Bud Light, what Bud Light did is they tried to placate a group of consumers that weren't really their consumer base, and in doing so, they alienated their actual base. Cracker Barrel is doing the same thing, and they came out with a few statements this week, and if you notice the tone, it's very condescending. It's sorry that you guys don't get what we've done, but trust us, we know best, because they're trying to appeal to the next generation. But appealing to the next generation is actually alienating the consumers that have sustained your brand for decades, and that's going to drive customers away. We've seen their stock price, plummet. Donald Trump is now weighing in, so the tide is against Cracker Barrel.
What killed me, Rich, is when the CEO came out and she was claiming everybody loves it. Remember that? Right before it was obvious everybody didn't. She clearly was being controlled by her staff, or they were making these half-assed surveys that didn't really tell what was going on, because clearly, I mean, we have economic proof that it was wrong.
Yeah, I assume they focus grouped it, just the focus groups were out of touch. So I don't think this is woke. Woke would have been replacing Uncle Herschel with a trans person on their logo, right? This instead, in taking a very distinctive brand that people felt a very personal connection to, putting it in a generic corporate blender and chopping it up and coming up with something that looks like everything else. And that's how they're alienated their core audience. But look, this is a brand that needed a refresh. They needed to do more to attract people to their business, but they can't alienate the people who love it in the course of doing it.
All right, let's go from the sublime to the ridiculous. And I want to start with you on this, the Lisa Cook business. We now have the Fed circling the wagons around Lisa Cook, saying you're not going to get through our wagons unless we go through this long, drawn-out legal process that might literally take a couple of years. That she might still be working. She is a voting governor of the Fed, having done something which the Fed itself said is very harmful to the general economy. It was one of the factors that led to the 2008 financial crisis. What do you make of this? How's
it's going to be a huge legal fight, obviously. It's going to the Supreme Court, obviously. One of the issues will be, I don't know how quickly. I think pretty quickly, though.
Better
And Trump
be.
is not saying I can just replace whoever I want on the Federal Reserve Board. He's saying he's doing it for cause, right? Because of this alleged mortgage fraud. So then the Supreme Court will have to consider what constitutes for cause. That'll be a big part of this. But the Supreme Court generally, the drift of its jurisprudence, including the second Trump term here, is saying the executive gets to fire whoever he wants, even if they're part of an independent commission. They've tried to cabin the Fed from that logic. I don't think that makes much sense. And I kind of think on the legal merits, Trump could very well prevail here.
Now, Brianna, it's not only the Fed that's circling the wagons. We're beginning to see it with the media.
Yes.
Using the charge that because she's black, that's the reason there's a racial component to all this. Is that going to fly at all? When you look at the record, you look at what she actually did, which is if she comes up with counter evidence, that's fine.
Yeah.
And I say what she did. That is what is alleged, but it does seem to be pretty clear that there's a paper trail here, and the president and his team don't want to wait a couple of years until that plays out.
Right, and the media has a habit of filtering everything through the lens of race or ideology. So of course that's the immediate narrative they take here. And at the end of the day, they just are trying to turn this into Donald Trump is usurping his authority. Donald Trump is taking it a step too far.
Right, it's Donald Trump the dictator.
Yes, they're trying to paint the picture that Trump is a dictator, and this is that, opportunity to do so. But I think to Rich's point, I think the Supreme Court's going to get this, and I don't think the media will be vindicated.
Now, the other Donald Trump is a dictator story that's been going around is what's happening with D.C. and the crime control, which has been enormously successful. We don't need to go into all the stats now. But the point is that's now another factor that's being calculated in their description of who Donald Trump is and what he is.
Yeah,
I think
so
it'll fly.
Washington, D.C., the federal government, Congress ultimately has plenary power over Washington, D.C.
Right.
It has granted D.C. home rule as a favor, in effect, and there are important exceptions. Donald Trump, the President of the United States, controls the National Guard. He can take control of the police department, and it's worked so far.
Okay, Rich, Lowry, Brianna, Lyman, great to see you both. Thank you very much for being here.
You.
Appreciate it.